I'm Ron Carmel. I'm the Dean of the Kogat School of Business. I know that almost everybody in the room knows me pretty well, but there's a few who don't. It's a special pleasure to see the presentation by Spencer. Not only was he a star student of mine a few years ago when he was in my class, but now I've come to learn from my students. That's the ultimate compliment that a professor can give a student. I've come here to learn about gamification, and I'll tell you that I first came across it when a colleague of mine about 2004 told me, oh, Ron, I'm going to a conference on serious games. And serious games sounded to me like an oxymoron, and I couldn't really parse it yet. Gamification, the word had never been made up yet. And so I had him explain to me in a few sentences what serious games were. And of course, they're a precursor to all of this gamification. So I really look forward to this.
Excellent. Alrighty. Well, thank you so much to Dean Carmel, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here for this senior capstone presentation. I am Spencer Swan, as you can see on the slide, and I'll be talking to you today about level 2 of gamification, meaning taking gamified marketing to the very next level. And that's what I'd really like to get to today, is that marketers right now are kind of using gamification on a very surface level, and that there are a lot more layers to the paradigm that can be delved into. So that's the brief synopsis. And I want to bring you to a place where every thoughtful conversation starts, and that would be Starbucks, DuPont Circle, of course. And at Starbucks, as you may or may not know, you can use an app to purchase your coffee, your food. And when you use this app on your phone, it's linked up, you get stars. And these stars accumulate on your phone, eventually getting you free drinks, free food, and a gold card, which is the thing that everyone really values about the Starbucks reward program. Gold card occurs when you get 30 stars in a 12-month period. And you get some pretty special perks when you get a gold card. The free birthday drink is also with the green card. Custom offers via email. They just get you to sign in to their marketing email as a perk. Free refills on drip coffee and tea, also at the lower levels. But then you get free food or drink with every 12 stars that you get on your card. So it's an extra little, like, you get a stamp. Pretty normal for restaurants, as we all know. But you also get a very personalized and special gold card to put in your wallet and carry around with you. So, you know, it's stars, right? We're all chasing stars, like Mario, and we're trying to accumulate them every year to keep some kind of gold status that is incentivizing our behavior in a gamified way. And it's already gamified. You're already experiencing this. Like you get rated on Uber, also stars, like you get restaurant stamp cards, again, or if you just collect points on any retailer that you shop with. These are all gamified systems. They're all relying on gamification. So to give you a preview of the recommendations I want to give you today, I want to push you as marketers and technology savvy people to go beyond behaviorism in pursuing gamification, to use the fantastic, which is a literary theory that I'll get into later, and to engage people through choice instead of through kind of surface level systems. There's a lot more depth to video games that really engage us. So, brief agenda for today. We're going to talk a little bit about what gamification is and why it's kind of relevant. Then we're going to go into the psychology and the different ways in which gamification motivates us and how it differs from behaviorism. Jump into game design, the elements that are useful in terms of marketing, and how you can really use game design elements as persuasive tools. We might not think about them. Jump into a little bit of alternate reality game marketing, and then give you some takeaways in terms of more practical kinds of marketing campaigns besides these ARG campaigns. So let's talk about gamification first. As you may or may not know, 2.4 billion people are online in the world right now, and half of them call themselves gamers. A fair amount of people. To add to these statistics, about 67% of American households play video games right now. And of those, 74% of those gamers are under 50 years old. So this is a trend that's on the rise. We already have gamers that are identified in the culture, And it's going to continue to be a trend because people are already familiar with these video game systems and they're going to see them in more aspects of their life. So to give you a brief synopsis of the current business applications that exist right now, both Google and IBM have used gamification to lower their recruiting costs by over 50%. And both Facebook and Spotify have raised employee engagement to a pretty staggering 95% using gamified systems. It's also projected to be a $2.8 billion market by 2016, just in terms of implementing current gamification theory into businesses. So not even the complex consumer marketing campaigns that I'm talking about, just these kind of surface level integrations. Give you a definition. This is the most cited researcher in the field, Sebastian Dieterding, and this is the definition: the use of game design elements in non-game contexts, which is super broad, and we're going to get into breaking that definition down later in terms of what elements he's really talking about and what qualifies as a game-like system and a non-game context. But the main point here is that these are the three main goals of gamification, the three main results in terms of research by Garm Lucasen. And they also happen to be the three primary goals of consumer marketing. So obviously the technique and marketing overlap in many ways. Just to give you some brief definitions for the non-marketers in the room, engagement is just having ties to a brand. Brand loyalty and brand awareness are both about also that relationship with the brand, but also knowledge of it. And more academic theory for you in terms of a thought paradigm for how video games and gamification are different, because they're often conflated. Video games occupy this space, and this is an academic spectrum, of a whole product that is gaming related. And gaming and playing are two very similar terms, but they act in this case as like interacting with an electronic medium versus interacting with non-electronic mediums. So video games in this instance are whole entities that you interact with and have this kind of relationship with, you engage with. Gamification only takes parts of video games and applies them in the same gaming space. So it's kind of like if you were playing with a ball, let's say, or spinning a wheel of some kind, and then you saw like a roulette wheel on a website or a bouncing ball on a song lyric. That's playful design and not a toy, right? So it's used in another context, but it's still the same kind of item. Even more academic detail, I know it's a big chart, but these are the 5 levels that Dieterding laid out of gamification itself. So you start with level 1 being like badges, leaderboards, which is ranked players that compete against each other and have rankings kind of worldwide or within a region, and levels, which are all superficial layers over things. They're just visualizations. They're not actually systemic. And then you get into the more engaging elements of play and what we more often think of when we engage in a game, right? So time constraints, turns, clear goals, opponents that interact with you, and even moving into like challenge, exploring fantasy, exploring a new world, invoking a sense of novelty in some way. And these are the things that actually engage us even more. So why do they actually engage us? Why does this work? And how is it different from behaviorism? Being sucked in by rewards by themselves, only being motivated by incentive structures. Some people think that gamification is this. But to give you background on behaviorism, this is a cartoon of Skinner, who is the pioneering psychologist in terms of behaviorism, who put pigeons in boxes and got them to peck a button a certain number of times for a reward, usually. He also administered punishments, reinforcements on different schedules, and motivated the pigeon in that way. So what is about the individual and the learner and the teacher are two people that I refer to in terms of just the person absorbing information and the person trying to give that person information throughout these 2 slides. The individual is totally instinct driven, and they're only motivated by their kind of more base needs. And they're always extrinsically motivated by the environment. So those rewards and punishments are the only thing that get them to take any action. There's no internal processing or thought. The teacher completely controls the environment and therefore the behavior of learners, right? And the teacher is the active one, the learner is always reactive. Because if you control the environment completely and they're only motivated by the things that occur in the environment, then there's no action on behalf of the learner besides reacting. So gamification has actually been proposed as another learning theory by a scientist named Bureau. And the elements of gamification are sort of based on behaviorism, but they operate under different contexts and rules. So the individual is actually conscious in a gamified system, which is very different. And therefore, they're intrinsically and extrinsically motivated. So they think through their own actions in accordance with the environment. And then they use personal processing to reflect on what they've learned. It's actually a recursive process. The teacher also is the one that establishes the paths, so they sort of do control the environment, but then the learner chooses which path to take. So the learner is effectively making some kind of choice, and that choice is the engagement factor. So to give you a brief synopsis of comparing these two, how they're the same, behaviorism and gamification. They both believe in the superiority of positive reinforcement, which I'm happy to answer any questions about later in terms of positive versus negative reinforcement and punishments. Gets into a lot of psychological theory. They both rely on small tasks that are repeated step by step. And both involve a lot of immediate feedback. So the key principle is that you're responding to players or the learner immediately upon taking action. And each one ramps up in terms of challenge over time. But they are pretty different at the same time. So gamification is actually based on community evaluation. So if you establish many different paths that learners can take, then you're just setting a system and they are all given feedback through that system. You're not actually individually coaching them through any action. There are diversified learning paths, as said, and gamification actually shows you small achievements over time and they visualize those achievements in gamification. Where in behaviorism, you may get the reward and then it's gone. You don't know if you advanced to level 5 math student or not. And with that, I want to talk about game design and what actually is motivating to us about video games, what's actually engaging, that layers on top of this psychological theory. So in game design, there are 6 primary goals. And I want to talk to you about those goals in the first part of our definition, which is game design. And the goals here are, number 1, curiosity, invoking a sense of not understanding the world. Mastery, in terms of I've practiced this, I honed this skill, and now I apply it to a new situation. I've got mental stimulation, being I've encountered a problem and I have the solution for that problem. It's very satisfying for people. Narrative is another huge one that I will talk about a little bit later. And this includes kind of world building and being involved in a certain kind of fiction. Novelty, just seeing a thing, not knowing what it is. And flow, of being lost in a certain circumstance. So these are the 6 goals that game designers try and invoke, and I actually think they do overlap a lot with what consumer marketers should try and invoke. And we'll talk about that with respect to campaigns. So what are the elements that are actually used within these systems? Well, they include choice, story, mechanics, and setting, all of which I will go through momentarily. But first I want to talk to you about play, which is the crucial part of a video game, of course. Is that you do have to play with it and you do have to have fun while playing a video game. So there are 3 types of play according to a game design series on YouTube called Extra Credits, where they have professors of game design that do a series. And these are practice, improvise, and plan. So in practice gameplay, you might have the same set of levels over and over again and the same set of challenges. All the enemies are in the same place. All of the power-ups are in the same place, and you can rehearse them over and over again until you get them right. In improvisational gameplay, you're given new situations and a lot to react to. This is a game called Faster Than Light, where you travel through space and you kind of command a ship the whole time, the last one being Mario, of course. And there are many different variables, and they all are randomized throughout the game experience. So it's completely reactive. And the last kind of gameplay is planned gameplay. This is a game called Hearthstone. And in planned gameplay, it's a mixture of the other 2. So you have a sense of practice in terms of preparation and in terms of knowing the tools that you have to work with. but you also have a sense of improvisation. So Hearthstone is a game where you play with 2 different decks of cards that you put together, and then you have to react to random chance and what your opponent does, neither of which you have any knowledge of before the game actually takes place. So usually games use sometimes all 3 of these elements, but they usually rely on 1 to 2 of them. And that's exactly what marketers should do. So what is choice? Choice is kind of the fundamental element that I want to explore in this, and the thing that really engages people. It's about overcoming internal conflict. So when you have incomplete information, as well as a set of incomparables, which is game design slang for 2 things that are not obviously the right choice. So one of them may be this like spear that can get through armor, and another one is a bow and arrow that you can shoot enemies from a longer distance. But you don't know what you're going to encounter, so you have to pick one or the other. It's not clear which one is right. And they also allow you to reflect upon your own intentions. So when you engage in a choice, you're really making a decision that says something about you and says something about your character, usually in a game. It's kind of role-playing. And this is a choice in Diablo 3, where you pick a character class, and that character class governs the entire rest of your experience. But you don't know what skills you're going to have as that character class, you don't know what weapons you're going to be able to use, and you don't know what you're going to be able to find. But it says a lot about who you are if you pick Barbarian versus Demon Hunter versus Mage. And it starts your role-playing experience. So mechanics. Anything you do in a game is a mechanic, to clarify. And mechanics are often metaphors for players, even though they don't conceptualize them that way. So if you're jumping on an enemy, or if you're running along a plane, you're actually acting out something for someone else. And meaning adheres to that action. So this role-playing occurs subconsciously. And when you do it in the real world, it creates a sense of engagement because it's reflecting on you and it's a choice. And it's not always explicit. So you can make a mechanic within a game structure or within a gamified marketing plan and have it rely on a mechanic, which is an implicit choice. It's not exactly made clear to the person. So in Zelda, swinging your sword is a mechanic, and locking onto people is a mechanic, raising a shield is a mechanic. Any of these are mechanics. Of course, marketing will rely on many different mechanics and terms of play, but these are just some examples. And setting is the 3rd element that I want to cover. Setting is the boundary of choice in a game world, right? So it lets you have a feeling of agency because it's the thing that you interact with. Though consequences are usually negligible in terms of the world, at least in a game design aspect. So if you're interacting with some kind of fictional place, a designer just picks the bounds of your experience, and then you can do whatever within those bounds. So like in Zelda, if you're going to run around and cut people's grass for hours and just like take money that drops from the grass, which is a thing that actually happens, then that's a choice that you can make, and that's within the setting. But if you want to like jump off the edge of the world, you can't do that because the designer has indicated a bound. And therefore the designer decides what's unusual. And we're going to get into defining what's unusual and that being a core part of the experience in terms of marketing campaigns a little later. So this is a setting of Skyrim, which is a pretty popular role-playing game. And this is the main map that you interact with through the whole experience. So you can't go off of this map in Skyrim, but you can go anywhere within it. You're setting the bounds, you're defining the experience, and you're creating all the consequences of choices. The last element that is really fundamental to game design is constructing some kind of story, some kind of meaningful architecture for you to engage in. And it is the thing that creates the perception of choice. Because even if the story is overarching, even if everyone experiences the exact same story in a game, they think that they have an effect on it because they're acting out the actions of the characters, which is a fundamental experience to video games. So consequences within a story are usually evident, but sometimes not immediately. So you may make a choice at the beginning of some game and then have them come to fruition later in the game when you may or may not have forgotten them. And the way that game designers do this is through a method called beads on a string. And in beads on a string, you have the beginning of a narrative line and the end of a narrative line, and you have choice points that are scattered throughout. So each one of these beads represents a choice that you make acting out a character or acting out yourself within the game. And they take two different narrative paths, but they always converge back to the same overarching narrative. And I just want to tell you a game about, this is a game called Roddy Out of Stories, where you make a very big choice in the middle of the game. There is a war between humans and non-humans, and you have to side with one of them. And it defines the entire rest of your experience up to the final dungeon of the game, where everything comes back together and there are only a few lines of disparate dialogue. So it's a very huge choice point, and it affects most of the plot of the game, and you go through even different dungeons. But then you're rewarded with the exact same circumstance and the exact same ending, but you still feel like you made a choice and still feel like that you have a sense of agency. So after we've gone through all these elements, what are non-game contexts? How do we actually use non-game context when we want to use all these elements? Seems kind of impossible, and it was a wall in my research for a very long time. And you do it through a thing called the fantastic, which is pioneered by a literary theorist in the 70s named Swan Todorov. And he essentially posed a theory that when you encounter something unusual, like people dressed as elves and orcs and knights in a random forest that you are walking through, that there's a moment of indecision that occurs to you. And that indecision is when you have to assume either that you're insane and that the world is not what it seems and it's only according to your kind of irrational human nature, or that the thing that's happening to you is real and that you're seeing it. And if you are in fact seeing it, then it's going to be pretty cool. So the outcomes of the fantastic as a sensation, fantastic is the moment of indecision. There's a moment then where you decide. So you either decide, A, that you're hallucinating, basically, and that all the events you're experiencing are completely unsettling because you don't know what reality is in accordance with your own systems anymore. Or that the events are real and that you're having to renegotiate the fabric of reality for a moment because you didn't think the thing was possible. And Todorov called that the marvelous. The marvelous just so happens to coincide with what marketers call surprise and delight, which is when you experience something that you didn't expect, but is fantastic and you really enjoy. So next, I want to talk to you about actual campaigns that occur in non-game contexts that are gamified. And I want to do that through talking to you about alternate reality marketing. And these games, and they are games, technically, integrate fiction and reality for the person that's being marketed to. So there's a weaving together of some kind of brand mythology and real life mythology, which gets to be very interesting. And there's a constructed world for the players, therefore. So they inhabit a bunch of websites. It's completely fiction, but it is integrated into reality. There's story and mechanics involved in all of these campaigns, and they engage players and then respond to them in real time. So they'll create more events, they'll pare things down, kind of like regular marketers do with A/B testing, only in a very broad sense. And the one I'd like to talk to you about is the campaign for Tron Legacy, which was a total alternate reality gamified campaign. So Tron, as you may or may not know, was a movie in 1984. And it was launched as this kind of like person inhabiting a digital world, and they're integrating into a computer system, which was very strange for the time, and it's completely overdone in bad CG. And they decided to make a sequel like 25 years later to this movie. And in doing that, they needed a really special marketing campaign to really inspire people to engage, because you had like middle-aged guys who love Tron, and you also have Disney at the helm of the movie wanting to pull in smaller children to really be engaged with the film. So what I'm going to do now is show you a video by the company that made this campaign called 42 Entertainment, and just give you a brief overview of what goes down. So they leak objects into the real world from the original Tron starring Jeff Bridges, and give people codes to access a special portion of their website called Flynn Lives, which is basically like the lead character goes missing after the first movie, and then people start to try and find him through scavenger hunts, and they lead them to this arcade. at San Diego Comic-Con. So at Comic-Con, oh no, they find a special arcade that is an exact recreation of the arcade in the movie, which is very cool. And from there, they're engaged by various agents who like construct this world further. So there are operatives on the ground who are being like brand ambassadors. And then there's also hundreds of websites and hundreds of hours of content that these people are navigating through and solving problems with. So just the other really great parts of this campaign, the really cool experiential elements, are that they staged a live press conference with the fake CEO of Encom, which is the evil corporation in the first Tron, and then even parachuted the star of the movie into the press conference, which is pretty amazing. And this is just, there's a lot of hype. This is the fictional CEO, as you can see, it's the same guy. He talked to IGN, which is a large gaming publisher and website, and it was a very big success. So there are a lot of interesting gamification aspects of this campaign, but the successful part of it is that it engaged over 5 million players, which is a huge number of people, to look for a fictional character that could not actually be found besides watching the movie. It gives you a sense of the fantastic because you're encountering something that's completely out of the scope of normal reality, and then you are solving that question and concluding that it's fantastic. You're surprised and delighted when this event takes over San Diego Comic-Con and you show up and you get to find a special bar that's a recreation of the bar that's in the second movie. And you get those senses of curiosity, of novelty, mental stimulation, and narrative, which are all key components of game design. It also used all 3 types of play, because you had practice in terms of the creation of various games that people could complete levels of and then receive rewards. You had improvisation in terms of these like guerrilla agents who would give you new things to do, quests, as we like to say. And then planned gameplay in terms of figuring out when to crash a fictional press conference, let's say. And it also responded to players. So the 42 Entertainment responded in real time to people's actions within this new context. It also did pretty well at the box office. Made over $400 million in revenue, which made it the 11th highest grossing film of the year. It was a #1 rank on opening weekend, and it got nominated for an Oscar, which is a pretty big deal. 42 Entertainment also won some awards. They got honorable mentions at the Webbies. They got nominated for Cannes Lions, and they won a THEA award. Just to give you some context of this agency's other work, they're kind of a niche agency, so they always do gamified marketing campaigns. They always do these very large-scale alternate reality campaigns. Here are 6 of them, including Tron, and the brands that they are for. And just to give you a snapshot of the general results of these campaigns together have over 57 million interactions from different people, which is a huge number for any marketing campaign. So obviously there are some limitations to a campaign of this size, and they're in setting scale. So it's very hard to sell a client on a scale this huge. And you need a really special product to promote in order to convince people to do that. Commercial creatives who work in agencies right now often lack experience in game design as well, which is kind of a crucial element to pushing gamification to another level, is understanding the principles of game design. But I'm here talking to you about them today, so maybe you can do them. And then you have to have fans of the brand who are willing to suspend some of their disbelief, right? So they have to buy into a fiction that you're creating in order for it really to be effective. So where's the middle ground on this kind of campaign? And how can we strike a balance between scale and innovating in terms of games? I want to show you another clip from a campaign called Mr. Robot, which was done in part by these fine gentlemen back here, working for iStrategy Labs, which is my current marketing agency. And Mr. Robot is about a hacker that essentially is Robin Hood in the world. And it's an NBC show that's launching this summer in prime time. And ISL did a brand ambassador campaign in South by Southwest that was pretty highly gamified. So right here you can see hackers being sent into Austin to speak to different people. And they posed around, and there are about 30 brand ambassadors that are involved in this. They posed around the festival grounds and handed out one of two colors of cards. So they handed out white cards that are general information about the show and the screening that was taking place at South by Southwest, and black cards, which give you money off of Austin and South by Southwest food. And you can get one of these black cards by taking a selfie with one of the agents, among other things. So you can see them here in their various vignettes, kind of framed around the city, like paused to hand out one of these cards. And overall, it's an interesting gamification because it's an integration of fiction and reality, but it's kind of limited in terms of play mechanics and other aspects that are addressed. So how did this campaign actually, what did they do right? Well, they had some really great results. The reach, actually, it was almost 10 million people on various social platforms, and there were over 2,400 tweets within the span of about a week. So pretty solid performance of a marketing campaign, especially at South by Southwest, which is just crowded with noise of other campaigns. And you can see some of the top influencers over here include The Verge, which is a pretty major publication. And they, in fact, published an article that mentions the marketing for Mr. Robot. And it was very successful for ISL. So they achieved the Fantastic, and they also achieved an Audience Choice Award at South by Southwest, partially from getting people to come to this screening. They inspired curiosity, novelty, some of the very similar elements of these broader ARG campaigns, but in a more streamlined way and in a more cost-efficient way. And they encouraged the audience to play by taking one of these cards, by taking a selfie, by having engagement with the brand that made them feel like part of a story. And there are a lot of opportunities that can be explored in expanding this, obviously. So they can expand the setting, they could complete the narrative for audience members who may or may not be fully engaged right now. If you just take a card, then you're kind of a bystander to Mr. Robot's actions. But if you're part of the hacking world and you're talking to Mr. Robot, it's a very large step in terms of engagement. You can create a more sense of immersive play, and you can respond to players in terms of modernizing the brand ambassador approach, including more social ties and really speaking back to people. Scaling nationally, of course, could be real. It would require a lot of time and investment, and the brand would have to be very willing to do this on a national level. So, to kind of move towards a wrap up here in terms of takeaways, I want to talk to you again about these recommendations of going beyond behaviorism, exploring gamification as a learning theory, using the Fantastic as a way to create surprise and delight, the marvelous in your audience, and really integrate fiction and reality in an intriguing way that inspires engagement. And to rely on the key gaming mechanic if none of the other elements of choice, and that choice is the thing that engages us to a very large degree. And just to put these principles into action, I want to talk to you a little bit about how Starbucks can level up its approach to the reward card system. So we're back here in DuPont, and I call this campaign Starbucks Search for Self. And in the Search for Self, Starbucks would establish various personality profiles that are based on purchase behavior. And then they would create gated content on their website for each of these personality profiles, which I'll get into in a second. And then they can assign quests to the various factions of Starbucks users that can be explored. And they can even develop some of these behavioristic systems to reinforce what they're doing. So levels, achievements, and eventually custom cards, let's hope. So here are the 5 classes that I've laid out for Starbucks. Aficionados would have tried more things on the menu than your average customer. Scientists could be people that create custom drinks more often than anyone else. Historians would usually purchase more classic drinks. Chefs would always get food with their order. And wanderers would have explored more Starbucks than the average user, so traveled to multiple locations. Give you some background about the potential content that Starbucks could use for these. Aficionados would get content about coffee sourcing. They would have access to these like exclusive tastings of new coffees. And they could get quests about finding out more about the coffee that Starbucks serves. Scientists would be able to get more content about other drinks that they could possibly make. Edit the secret menu that we all sort of know about in Starbucks, which would be very cool as a piece of content. And even create new drinks that may be published on the Starbucks menu. Historians would be the most frequent class or profile, just because most people purchase classic drinks at Starbucks. And therefore this content would be kind of the easiest to access, lowest barrier to entry. And it's just content about the brand myths that surround the brand, a little bit about their history. This is the first Starbucks in Seattle. And they would be the ones giving more specialized feedback and giving increased depth consumer surveys because they are so attached to the brand. And their quests would be about writing stories about their experience at Starbucks, publishing blogs, creating more in-depth content, taking more photography, let's say. Chefs would be able to get content about recipes and DIY projects to make Starbucks food at home. So on Pinterest, there are a bunch of recipes for those cake pops that everyone loves, and Starbucks could take advantage of that. They would get advanced info on product launches, and their quests could be about doing baking of any kind, and also maybe charity work for soup kitchens or giving away baked good products, working in that capacity. Wanderers, to wrap up, would receive content about travel guides and exploring coffee in multiple regions of the world. They could then explore different stores and have quests based on that. And then you can surprise and delight them by giving an even better version of the gold card that is totally catered to their unique purchase behavior and who they are as a profile. And these can be linked even further through many other opportunities, which encourage profiles to compete, let's say. You create a point system, they engage in their quests, and then they have different rankings that go up every week. You can show people how to change their class eventually. You can say, okay, this is the requirement for the scientist class or the scientist profile. Go and do that and explore the other content that we have. You can, of course, construct more profiles and develop special in-store displays that maybe the gated content is the only thing that indicates anything about for the different profiles. Lastly, you could kind of create cross-functional quests where different profiles of people have to work together. So they have to make parties that solve certain problems. So to wrap up and to really sum up everything, marketing struggles at engaging people and encounters real stumbling blocks in terms of making sure that people are involved with brands and they're viewed as kind of superficial and often very surface level in terms of our lives. We ignore promoted posts all the time. Video games succeed in this exact element. So we have a lot to learn from them, and I think that, or I hope, that conveyed how to level up your approach to gamification as marketers in the new world and embrace gamification. So this has been my presentation, level 2, taking gamification to the next level in terms of marketing. And I'll happily take any of your questions now. So thanks, guys. Yes, Connor.
Do you see this as being something that's not necessarily applicable to all brands, but very effective for others? Because you mentioned a lot of entertainment brands and a lot of very experiential brands, but I'm thinking like Tide. Or if you're Morton Salt, like how do you incorporate gamification into something like that, where it's less about the experience and less about the people and the story. Or does that mean that suddenly you have your Tide and your Procter & Gamble, you have to up your game with much more of your commodity brands?
Mm-hmm. Well, you don't have to use gamification, of course. It's only one technique in consumer marketing. Have you heard of the Amazon button that you can push to order a new product?
No.
That's a way you can gamify. They actually recently launched these buttons that are integrated via your Wi-Fi in your home, and whenever you push one, it orders the product for you and ships it to your house. So you can construct any kind of narrative you want around that, or don't construct a narrative. there are a lot of levels of gamification, and you can just lean on the first one. You can go for incentive structures, you can rely more on behaviorism, you can go for points and badges and achievements that are very easy to implement and very low cost, but very motivating at the same time. And I believe that most brands would move towards that in terms of future marketing. But like weaving these giant campaigns, maybe not for everyone, as you say, absolutely.
So this is just a clarification first. If I understood you correctly, things like frequent flyer miles and loyalty cards, those are level 1 gamification, is the way you introduced it,
Mhm.
things, right? And level 2 is the kind of things that you actually talked about, this thing off. Now, one of the problems with the level 1 gamification, or as we simply knew that before, loyalty cards or affinity cards, is that they increase costs for marketers without a corresponding increase in loyalty or engagement, right? Because like everybody has all the frequent flyer and all the hotel cards, so Marriott and Hilton and Delta and American and United, right? And so it increased costs for the company. Obviously, all these things cost money.
Of course.
Now, I saw with your level 2, the 2 examples you gave, they were very expensive, whether it was the Comic Con or South by Southwest. So in that case, is there any data? You gave me some engagement data, but is there any data on any gamification, level 2 gamification? Because I know a lot of level 1 gamification, as you call it, I didn't call it gamification till I came here, has increased cost, but there's not a corresponding increase in benefits. So airlines now have like 3 trillion frequent flyer miles or points that they have to now give out, right, over time. And that. So is there any data on what financial benefits? You talked about, winning Webbies and Tias and Oscars even.
Yeah.
But is there any data on those things? And I think the second part of the question is what and probable answer to Connor. You listed Ford as having used this, right? So
Yeah.
if you know anything more about that, then that might be an answer, because while Ford is not exactly tied in terms of consumer excitement, it's about a relatively similar level of excitement as compared to, say, a video game or a movie, right? I
Yeah,
mean, as a brand,
sure.
it's a much more traditional, classic, all-American brand.
So to start from the back of the question,
Okay.
yes. The Ford campaign actually integrated with celebrities also and used influencers that way.
Okay.
So it was Ryan Seacrest and Joel McHale were put into a fake feud where they tried
A fake what?
feud,
Okay.
like on Twitter.
Okay.
And
Oh.
they tried to give away cars to different people, and that was the gamification system, was incentivizing interactivity with Ford based on like free trial runs of these cars and interacting with these celebrities. So pretty effective campaign overall. But to go back to the first part, there's kind of a paucity of information in terms of exploring these more intangible processes of gamification and like beyond the alternate reality game marketing scape. Like people just haven't attempted them. They've gamified on a surface level. They've done level 1, and in some cases it's been very successful, like with Google and Facebook. Some cases it hasn't been, like with frequent flyer miles. But could also be because they're not thinking of those as gamification. That
No, they're not for the most part.
yeah, that they're kind of encountering a problem. And the systems and rewards cards that we're talking about basically rely on people wanting to see numbers go up. And that's why you have all of the frequent flyer cards, because you want to see as many numbers go up as possible. But if you approach that interaction as a greater time requirement, but also more engagement with the brand, then I would think that it would be more cost effective as long as you are actually receiving that engagement. Because if you only had one frequent flyer card because you wanted the exact rewards from Southwest all the time, and you had a relationship with that brand, that would be probably a profitable system for them.
Right, but obviously that's not the case. I
Not the
mean,
case currently,
Right.
But it could be.
In
if
some other
it-
category, not in airlines, but it could be in other categories, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it seems like that it's similar to the Starbucks example of you could create profiles of different travelers. Um,
They've tried that with executive and platinum and all of those things, which I guess are still levels, levels within
Yeah,
levels.
and they're like colors. They're not catered to who you are. They're catered on how many miles you use.
Sure, yeah.
You know.
Yeah, of course, yeah. No, that I completely, and they don't create any level of engagement at all. I mean, there's nothing
Mhm.
being, engaging in any of that. And there isn't much of engagement in the Starbucks card the way it is currently running.
Exactly. You just want to keep your gold status.
It was interesting to see your percentages of the population who identified themselves as gamers. Did you stumble across anything where you were able to find out how the gamification marketing reaches people who don't self-identify as gamers? For instance, I suspect a lot of us have fallen prey to clicking through on Farmville, but wouldn't necessarily identify ourselves as gamers, right? And so I suspect you're probably reaching a broader audience than even what you posited with the presentation.
And it's interesting because there's a sense of like, gamers have familiarity with the systems, right? And they may think, oh, this is just like Zelda.
Right.
But the regular person on the street who's not a gamer, I shouldn't say regular because it's like half the people,
Right.
also is motivated by them, even if they don't observe them as a game system.
Right.
So it's within the marketing paradigm that it is gamified,
Okay.
right? It doesn't have to be publicly, this campaign is gamified and you should be experiencing it as a video game. The mechanics and the world building and the narrative and all those other elements should be kind of below the surface. It's like when you watch a really great movie and you're sucked in by it, you don't think of, oh, that was the plot and this is character development. You kind of just engage with the entire piece and the entire campaign. So I think that's the goal. What's up, Nick?
So I guess going back to what we were talking about before, it sounds like some brands are not going to be brands with high engagement. Like I'm not going to be highly engaged over Ziploc bags, right?
Mhm.
But for you, what industries do you think over the next few years are ripe for a level 2 style gamification, ideally?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's more geared towards entertainment brands, I would say, because they lend themselves towards establishing some kind of fictional world that can be integrated with the real one. So it's way harder to manufacture some kind of story for Starbucks patrons to engage in, as I found out, versus like if you're gonna do promo for a new Lord of the Rings franchise, it's much easier to link that mythology into our real world and make it kind of unusual and inspire the fantastic and inspire the marvelous, because it's a little more strange. So, music, movies, other video games. There was one of these ARG campaigns done for Halo 2, for instance, that was very successful. And I think that's kind of where it's going, and we may see it expand further, but kind of at lower levels for brands that don't have stories, or like really, really persuasive fictions, which is the part that's kind of required.
Good. If Don Draper were in the room,
Yes.
I mean, wouldn't he completely disagree about the Ziploc bags? I mean, wouldn't he say the issue is that no one's thought through the best possible story for Ziploc bags? And if
Mhm.
that's true, then is there room?
Yeah, but it's kind of like there's a difference between like a brand myth and the gamification narrative. So like the brand myth behind Ziploc can be the empowerment of the individual to seal their food in an airtight container and have it for later. But spinning that into a broader narrative that people really want to engage in is a lot more difficult in terms of Ziploc.
And maybe overkill.
Maybe
more
overkill.
probably, a little bit expensive.
For sure.
One of the counters I guess I had this conversation is when I was sitting here, I was thinking how perfect this would be for the healthcare industry. Specifically, maybe not hospitals, but maybe for certain like diseases. I'm one of the 9 million people in the United States who has diabetes, and we don't take care of ourselves sometimes. So gamifying the process, maybe there's not a narrative, but I think it'd be more about the rewards, and that would really engage me. And if my insurance company did that, I'd be willing to pay higher. I might pay a couple more bucks, or I might stick with that one medical device company that sort of engages me more. So I don't know what your thoughts are, but I think maybe it's not also a narrative, but what you can benefit from that engagement, how you could benefit from. Maybe that's just unique to the healthcare.
Well, yeah, it's in terms of visualizing your experience,
Yeah.
right? That's what you want, is you want them to collect metrics and then show you the metrics and show you that you're achieving a better level of health.
Yeah.
So if they put that into some kind of understandable form, like a level system, you would be more motivated by it. You would see a real result of taking care of yourself, which helps you form a habit. So there are also apps that you can like create your own habit with. and create a gamified system for yourself, and then follow along the steps of that. And it already exists for like fitness and exercise in a lot of ways, and I think it will go into the health space very soon.
Do you think that gamification is more for younger people and sort of excludes people? Because I saw in one of the slides you talked about how the majority of people that identify as gamers are 15 younger. So do you think that gamification is something that would pretty much just apply to people of a certain age, below a certain threshold or something, or do you think it could be applied to older? Some of it, I guess, is just a tech barrier, but I don't know.
And I think that ties back to like the willingness to suspend disbelief. And if the older generation and older people are willing to engage with some kind of thing that may or may not be real, then absolutely they could, be exposed to the highest level of gamification possible. But if they are skeptical of what is occurring to them, and they're constantly being like, well, that's not real because that's how they did it. It's like watching a magic act and being like, I know exactly how they did all these tricks. It's not exactly engaging and entertaining. So I think that's why the age gap kind of exists beyond familiarity with the systems. Yeah.
This is more of a clarification. Do you know, like globally, like I presume a lot of your examples are American. So I know in video games there's a lot going on outside also, which there are a lot of advances. So in gamification, are there any advances abroad or around the world that you're aware of?
There have been other campaigns by other like global agencies, but not exactly by smaller entities. So the gamification as a trend often follows the creation of a video game segment. So while there are countries like Argentina and Brazil that are growing in terms of their production of games, they haven't like developed to a point of using gamified marketing for things.
But for example, Japan, I believe, develops video games a lot.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I'm not aware of any gamified campaigns in Japan. But, yeah. Other questions? Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. Just as a final note, I'd like to thank Professor Fowler for sticking with me through a very different kind of senior capstone project.
I've never learned more from one.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And for Bonnie for coaching me through all the various aspects of this presentation in so many ways, and being here as a sounding board throughout these 4 years. It's been lovely. And to Jesse Bading, who's not here, but who helped me book this space and arranged for all this to happen. So, and thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate it. So.
I will even include napkins if you want.